to work properly with my phone. So I'm going to try to do that again soon. Hopefully you guys will get a chance to see it. Carlos Castaneda actually should have been in the previous bit about aliens. Kind of. Not quite. But it definitely makes fun of... he definitely falls into the New Age racism sort of thing that is has been a running theme of this series. I was going to do the Protocols of the Elder of Zion, but then I got an idea, which is to ask my friend Baraka Guggenheim, who is an expert on that sort of thing, and she's going to be guest lecturing with us about that. And then I was going to do something about the Muslim, whether or not Muslims are trying to control the world. And then some news broke today. It is Friday the 28th, 2021, about the Danny Masterson case with regards to Scientology. And so I decided, as our Secret Rulers of the World series continues, we're going to be discussing Scientology. I know it's been done to death, but, you know, there's a reason why. Before I begin, my name is Joseph Cadott. I'm an editor and writer. It's my most recent novel, Job Herself, about a asteroid princess whose family is slaughtered, and she has to regain the rightful throne, like her rightful throne. It's kind of like Count of Monte Cristo in space. And if you haven't read Count of Monte Cristo, please read that first, because it's a much better book than this one, because it's one of the best books in history. And then maybe read Jack Vance's Demon Prince series. And then, if you still want revenge fantasies, then here, this one's pretty good. That's what people tell me. I don't read my own work. So, this one, In the Land of Nod, is a espionage science fiction romance. Hopefully you like that sort of thing. If you do, you might enjoy this. My mother complained about all the gay stuff in it, but, you know, that's my mom. This is an anthology called Beyond Steampunk, which does not have any steampunk in it. I want to make this very clear. It's alternate histories that explored outside of Victorian London. It's a bunch of short stories. There's a recent book which we have yet to issue in paperback, which just because of just sheer oversight on our part. I mean, it really is nothing beyond that. Eventually we'll get around to it as soon as we remember. Called Fake News, which deals with conspiracy theories as alternate history. It's kind of the inspiration for this whole thingy here. So that's who I am. Let's get... as always, feel free to comment, make requests, rant, troll, etc. on this. If it gets beyond PG-13, I will have to cut that segment. Sorry to say. But I'd be happy to take requests in general. So let's start with the news of the day, which brings me to this. In a first, almost, a Scientologist has been arraigned on rape charges. The Scientologist is Danny Masterson, known to people as Hyde on That 70s Show, because it was also in a few other things. His brother was on Malcolm in the Middle and dated Laura Prepon, who subsequently became a Scientologist, which is one of the sadder things that happened on That 70s Show, besides when she bleached her hair, because don't bleach your hair. It looks awful. I don't care what Hollywood says. And, of course, when Eric left, and it was a shadow of its former self. I'm sorry, Josh Myers, but you are no toe for grace when it comes to comedy. Anyways, Danny Masterson was involved in multiple instances where he raped 3 women, at least, that we know of, who are going after him in the court of law. This is unique because he's a Scientologist, and they are also Scientologists, and Los Angeles is prosecuting or prosecuting this case. Those are 3 things which usually don't happen with Scientology. And I'm going to discuss a little bit as to why as part of our secret rulers thing. So let me be clear first. Scientology is not the most evil American cult that currently exists. The Fundamental Latter-day Saints, the Quiverful, Children of God, and a bunch of others engage in regular, sanctioned, and systematized child rape, as well as slavery. The child rape in Scientology occurs, as it does all sorts of places, but it occurs, it does have some sanction if the rapist was L. Ron Hubbard, who did in fact do that, as far as I can tell, and as far as like multiple testimonies can tell. I'm not going to bother saying allegedly because Scientology is straight up evil. They're also very litigious, and I could use the publicity, frankly. Because what are they going to get? Blood from a stone here if they sue me? And a lot of this is sourced all sorts of different places. You can look it up. I'm not going to bother mentioning most of the sources, except for there was a source called Xenu.net, which was a good source for Scientology information. I don't know if they still exist, but they were a big deal. There's the Fisherman, I can't remember, documents, which were released during a lawsuit. It happened, I believe, in the 80s or early 90s. They had to be hosted overseas for a while, but they're back in the U.S. They open up all of Scientology's religious documents, both the ones you need to become clear, which is their peak, until L. Ron realized he can make more money, so then he went to the operational thetans, which is another tier, which got even more Looney Tunes. The OT levels include the famous OT3 document, which describes how a bunch of the intergalactic evil overlord Xenu took some DC-9 looking spaceships, shoved a bunch of rebels in it, brought them to Tigak, which is Earth, blew them up under a volcano, and showed their souls movies. That's in OT3. You might see that reference in South Park. But the document itself is just a few pages, handwritten nonsense. Recently, there have been stuff like Going Clear, the Liam Ramini things, and a bunch of other stuff like this. All the information I have has been pulled from these sorts of sources. So, in other words, court documents, documents by people who left, and other similarly well-attested sources. So I don't have to say allegedly, because these are all things which are public and would be considered sufficient sources for any academic paper on the subject. So when I say that Scientology engages in slavery, which they do, I don't need to say allegedly, because there's a crap ton of evidence that they do, especially with what's known as Sea Org. So if you want to find out about Sea Org and how they engage in slavery, that's up to you. Now, I talked before in the previous episode about secret rulers and how they tend not to be secret once they become rulers. Scientology has tried really hard to become the secret rulers. They engaged in the largest infiltration of the American government this side of the Soviets. and it may possibly exceed the Soviets in terms of the KGB in terms of how heavily they infiltrated the American government. There was an operation called Operation Snow White, run by the Scientologists, which was part of their efforts to make sure that they were considered a religion for tax purposes as opposed to being what they could also be called, which is a self-help corporation. Um, Depending upon who you talk to and the stance they're taking that day, or rather the stance they think you want to hear, they will either describe themselves as a religion or as a non-religion. This is common amongst a lot of cults because they want to grab atheists and agnostics. Nothing bad on that. Those, I mean, those. It's fine to believe that. It's just those sorts of people tend not to want to be involved in a religion, but they also want to have the benefits of being a religion and the rights that are accorded to religions, such as not having to pay taxes. Um, so, you know, especially as they buy more and more property with their dwindling followers' money. So, it's not the money that's dwindling, the followers are dwindling. They're actually managing somehow to extort more and more money out of them, which is clever. You gotta give David Miscavige, or however you pronounce his name, props on that, even if he did have his wife killed. Maybe. So, they actually have infiltrated the U.S. government. They actually are running the town of Clearwater in Florida. They run a lot of Hollywood, and Hollywood is afraid of the Scientologists. Less so than they were a little bit back, now that more and more of their secrets are coming out. Not that they were really secrets. I mean, the stuff I was talking about here was all available on xenu.net in the 90s, and had been published before that. And again, the Fishman papers, which were CART documents, were public domain well before that. So, I mean, access may have been more difficult, but you could go to the literal court and get them and read them. So, why is this Danny Masterson thing so interesting? Well, because they've been working with the Los Angeles and regional justice departments for a long time to cover up a lot of indiscretions. Let's talk about the one that triggered Leah Remini's exodus from Scientology. So there was a woman named Shelly who was married to David Miscavige. Now, around 2005, I believe it is. This is off the top of my head, so the number may be off. She stopped showing up. She just disappeared. Whenever anybody asked about her, people would just say, "Oh, she's somewhere else, which is conveniently not here," or "Ask David," which became more and more common. It turns out that she seems to have been disappeared. Well, the Los Angeles Police Department says that they interviewed her. They will not release any information regarding this interview. And they say she's alive and perfectly healthy and free to come and go as she pleases. Or at least she was at the time that they went through this. However, close friends, Leah Remini being one of them, and many others, all of a sudden had no access to her whatsoever. This is a classic cult situation. If your social interactions are governed by an organization, then you are in a cult. That's one of the key elements to being in a malicious cult. Now, there are non-malicious cults, but, that's not really much fun. but your social interactions are being governed. Like all of a sudden, your close friends no longer have access to. Let's say that she's alive. I mean, she probably isn't, but let's say that she's alive, and that uh, the head of the Church of Scientology didn't kill her or have her killed. I mean, he's known for massive violent rages and physical abuse. So, I mean, he's a tiny guy, but somehow, tiny guys can, you know, beat the crap out of someone just as much as anybody else can. Uh, so, oh, and Scientology, by the way, isn't the most powerful cult in America right now. That would probably be the prosperity gospel cult, which we had a president who was a member of not that long ago. And those people pretend to be Christians, but there's no way you can be a member of the prosperity gospel and be a Christian. And there's a whole host of reasons why. You can feel free to ask questions about that. And if enough people, i.e. one, is interested, I might do a video on that. Let's go back to this Scientology thing. So, the Los Angeles justice system has been covering up for Scientology for a while. Shelly is just one in a long line of people who have been disappeared or forced to join Sea Org. Or Sea Org, by the way, is their slave legion of slaves who are supposed to be the most devoted, but they sign multi-billion-year contracts, which of course are not enforceable, by the way, that by like laws of anywhere and any place that does common law. I don't know about Napoleonic Code, but so everywhere in the United States except maybe Louisiana, but probably not Louisiana. They have these billion-year contracts where they will do whatever the Scientologists said. They lock them in torture conditions, such as stress positions, unventilated blocks of rooms with massive amounts of heat, force them to do chanting, force them to go without food or sleep or water for extended periods of time. Basic cult stuff, basic brainwashing stuff. Now, these sorts of behaviors are not unusual in cults, and Scientology has done this wonderfully. There's a couple of good documentaries which show exactly where the Sea Org people are, except they're also on a boat because L. Ron Hubbard was a awful naval officer, and he was obsessed with proving that he was a good naval officer. So he spent the last years of his life diddling people on a ship where the American government and other governments couldn't reach him in international waters before he was, and then he died, and then a couple years later, the Scientologists proclaimed him to have transcended or some nonsense. Anyways, yet another way they try to manipulate the law. So, all this has been ignored by the Los Angeles area justices. But, after a long, long fight, Danny Masterson has been brought up on charges, and this has been a multi-year fight, like years and years, for raping these three women. Now, this supposed the Church of Scientology says that, of course, this didn't happen. There is strong pressure on members of the church. In fact, it's one of their primary commandments to not bring in secular governance in any way, shape, or form. And that includes law enforcement, that you're not supposed to complain to the authorities if something happens to you. If anything negative happened to you, then you don't just by a member of the high-ranking member of the church. You just didn't understand what was happening to you, and it wasn't actually, in this case, rape or assault. In the case of a lot of what Miscavige and Tom Cruise supposedly have done. I mean, not supposedly. Physical assault is something that Miscavige is known for. So these four women who, these three women broke the rules and have been kicked out, obviously. Now that sounds like a minor situation, but if you're in a cult, and especially if you've been raised in a cult, then being kicked out means you lose your family, you lose your friends, you don't know anybody, you're all of a sudden having to deal with life the way everybody else deals with life, which can be extremely scary. So this is an act of severe courage by these women to come forward, even more so than it normally is. And it's always an act of courage when anyone comes forward and says that they were raped. Because there's a very strong potential that the other side will draw their name through the mud by declaring them to be promiscuous, to be misremembering the event, to saying that a good man's name or good woman's name, in the case of someone what was her name? Quite famous. There's multiple women who've had this. Name's off the tip of my tongue. Mariah Carey. I don't know if she actually raped anybody. She did sexually assault him. Again, not allegedly. This is discussed constantly in the media, or has been. This was heavily discussed in the media. Or Julia Phillips, the producer, who had her way with a lot of young men in the 70s because she was going to Harvey Weinstein them into good films. So this happens, but anybody coming forward is being courageous, and especially these women who risked losing their entire lives, and I'm not exaggerating on this, by coming forward, and that's what they did. Okay, now they've gotten a lot of support from outside, but there was the very strong possibility that they would be shut down and have charges raised against them, which happens with people who go after the Church of Scientology, because again, various municipalities may not be in their pocket, but they're not willing to protect the people who need to be protected as long as the church says no. So these women came forward, predictably, promiscuity or the desire to seek money from Masterson was raised as an objection by the church, which was dismissed. The various people who went to what the Scientologists call the WOG government, or the invalid government, WOG being an extremely racist term, by the way, that for the not in the U.S., but in Britain and Australia, it's ridiculously racist, like N-word level. I'm an American, so I can say it just the way they can say the C word in Australia and it not be, as bad as when we say it here in America. But anyways, so the legal system, which they have characterized in that way, is supposed to be avoided. Everything's supposed to be dealt with in-house, especially violent acts, especially anything that would make Scientology look bad. And these women stood up to that organization quite well, knowing that they could lose everything, and they have thus far succeeded. Whether or not they'll be vindicated in a court of law remains to be seen. There has been some breakdown in the barrier in the past. There was a man who killed several members of his family to prevent them from getting psychiatric services, because the Church of Scientology thinks that the psychiatrists are literally the devil, And the reason why is because L. Ron first tried to market this crap as his self-help nonsense, which he cribbed from Jack Parsons and several other people. I mean, like any good cult, he just stole a bunch of stuff. Some of it, like the stuff from Jack Parsons, was absolutely loony anyways. So when L. Ron was trying to publicize this, he wanted the psychologists to start using it, licensing it from him. The community of psychologists and psychiatrists, even in the late 40s, early 50s, where a lot of funky stuff like Freudism was still being taught, decided that this was laughably bad, which it is, and horrible for you, which it is, and should be treated as pernicious, which it is. And they said no, so all of a sudden, these people that L. Ron wanted to be tied with were the devil. So that's why you have a bunch of things like in Battlefield Earth, which is an okay space opera or adventure novel. It's ridiculous in so many ways, but it's ridiculous in a quasi-fun way. The villains are cyclos, which are obviously psychiatrists. The same thing is true in his laughably bad Mission Earth, which was ghostwritten because most of it was written after he died. And a bunch of other works that he'd produced. Anyways, so they're trying to return to where they were kind of a secret ruler of Los Angeles and the environs, and they are luckily losing this power, hopefully. And with that said, I'm way over the 25-minute mark, which I try to target as always. So I'm going to stop talking now. I don't know what the next video will be, but it should be somewhere in this Secret Rulers series. Again, as always, please feel free to contact me, either in this feed or the YouTube channel or Facebook or what have you. Ask questions, send requests, and so on. These are my books. They're always available anywhere you want to buy books, except for bookstores that are so aggressively hipster and indie that you can't buy normal books from them. So I'll talk to you guys next week, and maybe before that. See ya.